The regular meeting of the Charter Commission's Rent Stabilization Work Group will now begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this virtual meeting of the Charter Commission's Rent Stabilization Work Group. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. The city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and YouTube channel as a means of increasing public access and transparency. This meeting is public and subject to the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. For the record, my name is Jan Sandberg, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Charter Commission's Rent Stabilization Work Group. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to please call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum.
Commissioner Perry,
Here.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Here.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf,
Present.
Commission Chair Clegg,
Here.
Co-Chair Ginder,
Present.
and Co-Chair Sandberg.
Here,
There are 6 members present.
we'll let the record reflect that we have a quorum. We will now proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for the public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Commissioner, the agenda for today's meeting is before us, and may I have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second, Rubenstein.
Is there any discussion before the clerk calls the roll? Hearing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Commissioner Perry,
Aye.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Aye.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf,
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg,
Aye.
Co-Chair Ginder,
Aye.
and Co-Chair Sandberg.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
That motion passes and the agenda is adopted. Commissioners, there are minutes from a regular meeting of May 11th, 2021 that need to be accepted. May I have a motion to accept those minutes?
Moved, Perry.
Second.
Go on.
There is a motion before us. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on this motion.
Commissioner Perry,
Aye.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Aye.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf,
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg,
Aye.
Co-Chair Ginder,
Aye.
and Co-Chair Sandberg.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
That motion passes. The minutes are accepted. Item 4 on the agenda is the chair's report. I have nothing to report that is not already on the agenda, although I could ask Co-Chair Ginder if he had anything to add at this time.
I have nothing else to add to the agenda.
Thank you. Item 5 on the agenda is considering a proposal to amend Article 1 of the City Charter to add initiative and referendum for the sole purposes of exercising the city's authority to control rents on private residential property in the city. And I believe there is discussion, and perhaps Co-Chair Ginder would like to start off the discussion.
Thank you. I don't want to repeat myself, but one of the things that, excuse me, one of the issues that I've thought about on this is this proposed amendment in front of us. I don't see our primary objective is weighing in on the rent control aspect itself. That's a complicated, in my mind, legislative question that would typically be something that would be handled by the city council in the absence of Minnesota statute chapter 471, which requires that any rent control be approved in an election. And so with that said, seems to me our first concern is with the first ordinance, which is the initiative ordinance, and whether that is something that as a charter commission whose role is to look at the government structure and how government operates, whether initiative is something that we want to put into our charter, even in this small detailed area alone. With the materials that we've gathered, I think there's some significant problems with initiative. And I think in particularly in this area where you're trying to legislate in a very complex area. And so I guess my feeling is that putting aside some of the legal errors that have been addressed by Ms. Bashoon in the first ordinance, the initiative ordinance, is whether this charter commission feels that initiative is a proper method to put in this charter. And so I'll wait on that aspect until we get the next part of my discussion, until we get to the referendum portion of that.
Thank you. I think we should hear from other members of the work group in terms of their thoughts on what Commissioner Ginder has just said, or anything else that has to do with the initiative component. Is there anyone else who wishes to add to the discussion? You can jump right in, Commissioner Perry.
Okay. I was just going to say on the initiative component, I'm very concerned about having something that is as complicated as rent control or rent stabilization be the subject of the ability of people to put forth an ordinance without it going through a legislative process and all that goes with that legislative process of analysis and compromise and those sorts of things. So I feel very strongly that we should not be adding to our the structure of our government the ability to have initiative. I think we've seen in other parts of the country where there is initiative and it has not borne out good results as a result. And so that's how I feel about this particular component, this particular amendment.
Thank you. Commissioner Rubenstein, and then Commissioner Clegg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Ms. Chair. I agree with what has been said so far, but I had two other thoughts. One is that having read all the materials that you and Peter nicely provided us on rent control, it seems to be, it can work, or at least rent stabilization can work well only if it's done very, very carefully. And an initiative is not a way to do something carefully. It occurs to me that makes my feelings even stronger that initiative might be appealing if there's no other way to vote on the issue. But the state statute requires that any kind of rent control or rent stabilization legislation must go to the voters. So they're going to be voting on it anyway. So there's not really a need for initiative under that scenario.
Thank you. Commission Chair Clegg.
I agree with the comments that have already been made, and I will be in favor of rejecting the initiative proposal. As you know, we have three options. We can accept, reject, or submit a substitute.
Correct.
With respect to the other proposal, I will be in favor of submitting a substitute, which will basically correct the errors that are in the question.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other work group members? I have a couple of things to say, but I don't want to jump on you. Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
Chair, yes. I would also agree with what the other commissioners have said. And I think that we should reject the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to add that I've mentioned this before, but I did go through and listen to the city council meetings that discuss these amendments, as well as the public hearings. And I was bothered by the fact that there is no discussion about the initiative component at the city level. Perhaps among individual council members there was, but it's not in the public venue as far as I can tell. yes, I understand that it was part of in the law. They do mention the initiative part. That's great. But initiative is a very, very big deal to me. And I don't see how in the world we could possibly want to add it at this time without having a full public discussion among the council members, if nothing else. So that's another reason why I cannot support this, and I agree with Chair Clegg. At this time, perhaps then it would be appropriate to have a motion on how to deal with this, if that's satisfactory to the work group. And it sounded like Chair Clegg had a thought along that line, but I'll leave it up to whoever wants to speak.
I will move that we recommend to the full Charter Commission that the Charter Commission reject the proposed amendment concerning initiative.
Okay, that's Article 1, right? Okay, is there a second?
Second, Rubenstein.
Thank you very much. Is there any more discussion on the motion to reject the Article 1 amendment on initiative? Hearing none, will the clerk please take the roll on the motion?
Commissioner Perry,
Aye.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Aye.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf,
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg,
Aye.
Co-Chair Ginder,
Aye.
and Co-Chair Sandberg.
Aye.
There are 6 ayes.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And the motion passes, and we will be communicating this action to the full Charter Commission. Either we can certainly mention it at the upcoming meeting, although I think our full report won't be submitted until July. Item 6 on the agenda is considering a proposal to amend the charter, Article 4, to explicitly add the city's authority to exercise power to control rents on private residential property in the city. And we do have some amended language that came in from Attorney Bashoon, and we've also had discussion at our last meeting about some of Commissioner Ginder's thoughts. Given that he actually proposed some draft language, I would like Commissioner Ginder to begin this discussion.
Thank you. And I think this will lead, in my mind, to a similar motion to reject the current proposal from the City Council on the referendum aspect of this. I have thought about this at some length, and I appreciate the work that Ms. Bashoon has put in on this, but in my reading of the statute, as I've come through this, that in order to give meaning to the word control that's in the statute, when it talks about the ordinance or amendment that controls the rent control or rent stabilization, must be approved in a general election. And when you look at the current structure of what was sent over to us, their first part of the first may clause in Article 4 is really an enabling clause. It's not a control clause. And the control isn't after they pass an amendment, if they do so, that is the amendment that would control it. This amendment, or that would be the ordinance that would control it, but this amendment is just really an authorization. And so I think that, as I outlined in my proposed draft amendment or substitution, is that the second part of it is that any ordinance that's passed by the council then must be submitted at a general election and must be passed by the electorate. I feel that this is the best place for the council to exercise its legislative authority. And unlike the rent control amendment that's coming forward in St. Paul by initiative process, which has not been vetted by the citizenry at large, this way all the residents of the city of Minneapolis would have an opportunity to weigh in front of the city council, and then ultimately add an election when they come up with a proposal. So in my mind, this restores the council's power to act as a true legislature and satisfies the requirement of the statute. And as we did have some discussion on last week is, what is the proper tally in order to see if the ballot passes, whether it's a majority of those voting on the issue, whether it's 51% as we have for amendments under Chapter 410, or if we have something as a majority of those voting in the election, is a question that we would decide. But that's my background and my thoughts on why I proposed the amendment.
Commissioner Rubenstein, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just had a question. The language, the proposed language for the amendment to Article 1, which granted we've rejected, talks only about rent stabilization. And the proposed language for Article 4 talks about rent control or rent stabilization. And again, having been fortunate to have the benefit of all the reading, I realized that there's a big difference. And I wondered, and perhaps you know, Chair Sandberg, if there was discussion in the public hearings about those two, and why there's both rent control and rent stabilization in the proposed language.
I do not recall any discussion at either council or the public hearings differentiating, talking about stabilization as such. The focus in most of the discussions, and they've used the words in the, okay, go back. In the public meetings of the city council, I think they use control and stabilization somewhat interchangeably.
Yeah.
In the public hearing, the focus was totally on control.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I'm not quite sure where you go with that.
Sorry.
I mean, we can certainly change the language or do a modification of the language to eliminate control and just keep stabilization. I don't know how the rest of the work group feels about that, but it makes sense to me.
It does, but it would also be very confusing because people don't understand the difference.
Okay.
And maybe in this case, we want to give the city council more flexibility.
Okay. Okay, good point. So right now, the language, I think I'm looking at Commissioner Ginder's proposal that it should be in your packet. And it's very similar. I mean, he worked off of City Attorney Bashoon's language and just made some changes. But right now it does have both control and stabilization.
Right.
So was there Chair Clegg, I didn't see if you had your hand up or nope, it's not up. Okay. So the issues that I see that we're talking about right now are control versus stabilization or both. Commissioner Ginder added a paragraph in the number 1, subject to section 4.4C. I think that's the mayor's role. I can't remember.
That is the mayor's veto. I mean,
okay.
I think it's implied, but it may be an unnecessary clarification because the charter requires all actions to be approved by the mayor. Okay. But in this case, you might want to just have the additional clarification that that's also required here in the referendum process.
1, 2. Then we have the must versus may issue, a major issue is in my mind. And then we have the percentage voting, so for the majority versus 51%. Those are our issues. Is there something else there, Commissioner Ginder, that I've missed? I think those are the biggest.
No, Chair Sandberg, I believe those are the issues. Okay.
So do we want to try and reach a resolution today on these 4 components and come up with a amended amendment? What is the preference of the work group? Commissioner Clegg, I see your hand is up. You got covered by a document.
Thank you.
All right.
I support the Ginder substitute and would suggest that we adopt that today.
Okay. And with the understanding, we understand what the issues are that have been raised. And Commissioner Rubenstein, your hand's up again. Oh.
Yes, I also support Chair Ginder's substitute and would be very pleased to vote on it today in favor of it.
Okay, do we have comments from any of the work group members concerning the Ginder substitute? There's a hand up and I can't tell who it is. Is it Commissioner Perry? My people are covered. Okay,
Okay.
I'm good
Sorry.
at guessing.
I should have just
nope, that's
jumped
fine.
in.
Sure.
So I am a little concerned about, I would definitely be in favor of voting on something today. I'd like to get this
Okay.
out of the way and vote today. So I agree with that. I think that Commissioner Ginder has brought up some good substitutes in here. I do think, though, that one of the things that was an issue is the percentage of people who are voting, and I would recommend that it be, and I don't know if this is going to, you know, feel like a poison pill, but that it be the majority of people who are voting. I think this is a fairly, when you're voting on rent stabilization, and I think I would also, so when you're voting on rent stabilization, I think that's going to be affecting a good amount of people. It's a complex issue, and I think everybody in the city who is voting should be weighing in on that issue. So those are the reasons why I think we should have it be, the substitute should have, it be the majority of voters rather than 51%, like a charter amendment.
Okay, which is much more conservative than what either the original language or Commissioner Ginder's proposal, as I understand it.
Well, I think Commissioner Ginder, is that in the language, is 51%, Commissioner Ginder?
He added the 51%. The original language was more than half the votes cast on the ballot.
Yeah.
So
So,
more than half is 51%. And then what you're suggesting is, isn't that with constitutional amendments? There's enough lawyers here, you guys will be able to answer it. I think that Commissioner Ginder may have a response to that, and also
sure.
Commissioner Clegg. Okay,
So
Commissioner Ginder. Oh, I'm
if
sorry,
I,
Commissioner Perry, please.
yeah, I just wanted to finish up here, because Commissioner Ginder may want to address this as well. So I think when it comes to control, I'm sorry, rent control or rent stabilization, I think what we should really be focusing on rent stabilization. I have grave concerns about rent control, and I know I'm supposed to substitute or separate out the policy from the charter amendment, but I think there are, real, issues with rent control, and I don't want to codify that. But I think there, again, from the reading material that we had, there's a significant difference between rent stabilization and rent control. And I think the substitute should say rent stabilization alone. So I'm
Okay,
done with that.
okay, I'm going to go to Commissioner Ginder because I think he has some thoughts, and then it will be to Commissioners Clegg and Schwarzkopf. Commissioner Ginder?
Thank you. When I proposed the 51%, it was kind of a placeholder to generate this discussion. I chose it because although most of the referenda or initiative requirements that you see in city charters are a majority of those voting on the question, I thought it was appropriate that for our forays into referenda that we have a higher standard. I did not go to the highest, which is the majority of all those voting, because I think it ends up almost becoming too high. So I'm trying to do, as we so often call it, splitting the baby, between a really, really difficult one and the more generally accepted, easier standard to do this. Because once, or not once, but if rent control or rent stabilization were to come in, it needs to be difficult to change on a routine basis. It needs something that has to be thoroughly vetted and thought out and passed by a real majority of people voting on the question. So that was the reason behind it. And then just to briefly address why I have kept both rent control and rent stabilization in this is because the statute doesn't talk about rent stabilization at all. It talks about rent control. And I think that is because most people would view rent stabilization as a subset of rent control in some fashion, even though they're different. And so I think it's appropriate in light of the way the world has changed and what the nomenclature has changed since the statute was passed, that we allow the opportunity for either rent control or rent stabilization, which again, to some people is a matter of semantics, but I think it's important enough to give that ability, if we're doing this, to give that ability to the city council.
Okay, so as I interpret what you're saying, I did look at the statute. You're right. It's only rent control. So at the very least, we should have the word control in there somewhere just to reflect the statute. And then the stabilization makes it a little bit broader and maybe more flexible. I think that's what you're saying. Okay, Commissioner Clegg.
I think changing the standard to a majority of those who are voting in the election, a la state constitutional amendments,
Right.
is a poison pill. I think it will make it very difficult for anything to get adopted. And whether or not you agree with the proposal, if a majority of those voting on the question, or 51%, which I support, that should be sufficient. We shouldn't have to rely on people who only vote the top of the ticket and don't go all the way down, and we shouldn't consider those no votes. So I am not in favor of Commissioner Perry's amendment. I
Thank
assume
you.
it's an amendment, but
Oh, it's just, we'll get to amendments eventually here. Commissioner Schwarzkopf.
Yes. I'm in favor of the Perry suggestion. Having run elections in Minneapolis for many years when I was city clerk, what would happen if it comes to 51% voting on the question is that a lot of people who are really very interested will vote on the question, but the other voters won't pay any attention to it, will not vote on the question because they don't have a personal interest either for it or against it. And so I would think that the majority of those people voting is giving really all the people the opportunity to vote on and encouraging people to vote on it and to think about it.
Okay, Commissioner Ginder, did you have your hand up again, or you just didn't take it down?
I
can't tell.
apologize. I
Nope,
don't
that's
have it
okay.
again.
Everybody's got their hands up. Okay. All right. So we have it sounds like we have no issue with the mayor veto language. So that stays obviously in. May versus must, no debate. Everybody seems to be in favor of that. At least that's what I've heard so far. Control versus stabilization, a little bit of discussion going on. And then the big one is the percentage. I think we have two ways of doing this. One, we could actually take a straw vote or probably an actual vote on the control versus stabilization language and separately the percentage of vote language. Or someone can propose an amendment and just say, we'll vote on the Ginder amendment and take it at that. How does the group wish to proceed? Do you have strong feelings? Commissioner Ginder?
What I would do is I would move my amendment,
Okay.
and then assuming there's a second, then I believe then Commissioner Perry then can move an amendment to that and see if there's a necessary votes to substitute that language on the percentage number of votes.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea. And I assume we're talking about the original language that came from Commissioner Ginder a couple of meeting or so ago. So it includes control and stabilization language. It includes the mayor veto language. It has must versus may, and it has the 51%. Is that correct, Commissioner Ginder?
Yes, that's what I would move.
Okay, then I would entertain a motion to approve the Ginder language, if there's a motion, and Commissioner Ginder can do it because it's his motion.
Yeah, I'm moving it, so.
Okay, and it's a second, please.
I'm seconding it, Madam Chair.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second on the language. Do we have proposed amendments to this language? Any more discussion? Commissioner Perry?
Yes, I will, recognizing that we need, I won't make an amendment on the rent control and rent stabilization, as I brought up, since we need to have those in there. I recognize that I didn't realize the state statute said control. So I'm not going to make an amendment on that, but I will make an amendment that to the motion to have it state that it is for passed by a majority of the voters in the election.
And, okay, if this amendment passes, I think I would like to get Attorney Bashoon to give me some better, not as bad, it's just, I think she's more precise. At least she always has been. All right, so that's your amendment. Is there a second to the Perry amendment? Is there a
second?
Yes, so there's a second to the Perry amendment. So I believe now we are voting on whether we are going to change 51% to a majority of those voting. If that sounds correct, I believe we need to have the clerk call the roll on the Perry amendment. Commissioner Ginder, did you have your hand up again?
No, I did not.
No, you did that. Okay, so if the clerk would please call a roll on the Perry amendment. And the amendment is to restate, the amendment is to remove the 51% or more votes cast and replace it with language about being passed by a majority of all voters. Okay, thank you. Maddie?
Commissioner Perry,
Aye.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
No,
Commissioner Schwarzkopf,
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg,
No.
Co-Chair Ginder,
No.
and Co-Chair Sandberg.
No.
There are 2 ayes and 4 noes.
Thank you very much. We will revert to the original amendment as proposed by Commissioner Ginder unless there are other amendments. Are there any other amendments to the original motion by Commissioner Ginder? Hearing none, let's please take the roll on the Ginder motion amendment.
Commissioner Perry,
Nay.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
aye.
Commissioner Schwarzkopf,
Aye.
Commission Chair Clegg,
Aye.
Co-Chair Ginder,
Aye.
and Co-Chair Sandberg.
Aye. That
There
motion.
are 5 ayes and 1 nay.
Thank you. That motion passes, and that is the language that we will be forwarding to the full Charter Commission. And I believe that we can do that. We can give the language to both of them at the June meeting. We will not have a final report completed. Commission Chair Clegg, how do you have thoughts about how you would like this to proceed? To bring it, at least to talk about it in June?
I would like the recommendation to come before the Charter Commission in June. It's happened with some frequency that work groups don't produce their final report immediately, but produce it in the following month or two, and I think that would be fine in this case as well. But I think the work group should recommend its findings at the June meeting.
Okay, thank you. Having heard that, then my understanding is the work group will bring forward the 2 motions that were approved by this work group as 1, rejecting initiative Article 1, and 2, substituting back to the City Council for Article 4. Is there any other discussion on that? Are there any other items that people would like to bring forward for further discussion today?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
As far as the report,
yes.
I am glad to start working on the report. I would like to have someone else that would be available to review or to work with me on that. I don't envision a particularly lengthy document. nothing like the document that we did for the government structure work group, but a document that would talk about reasoning behind the initiative and referendum decisions, and a little bit about rent control and why we are not weighing in heavily on rent control because of the legislative aspect of that. So I would be glad to start working on that document in preparation for the July meeting, but I would like, if there are other volunteers that would be willing to review that or work with me on that.
And I believe I see Commissioner Rubenstein's hand.
Yes, and I'm happy to volunteer to help on that.
Thank you very much. I'd be happy to reread the draft, but I suspect that the two of our attorneys will have much more precise language than I could supply. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I would like to thank Andrea also. So
Thank you.
I'll try to get an outline out for that.
Okay, great. Anything else to come before the work group today?
Co-chair Sandberg,
Yes, Maddie?
do we intend to have the meeting next week or should we cancel that meeting?
My understanding is we would be canceling it. Is that correct, Co-Chair Ginder?
I would agree with that.
Yes, I think our meetings probably, work group meetings are over at this point. Because we'll be taking something to the June Charter Commission and we'll bring something to we might want to have one just before the July meeting to review the report before we take it to the Charter Commission. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea, just to have
Okay.
one last meeting as we go through the report.
Okay, if that makes sense. Does that help, Maddie?
Yes, I will put out notice on LIMS in terms of the cancellation of next week's meeting.
Thank you. Any other items for discussion? Well, with that, we have concluded all the business to come before the work group today. And without objection, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Great work.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Maddie.
you. Thank you all.
Bye, Andrea.
Bye, Jan.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm going to go